All right, so this is going to be a review of using prop entities in the game. So the first thing is the entity tool is this light bulb thing here. We've been using this quite a bit. This is where all of our entities come from. So we're going to click on that, and we're going to go to this side over here. So under objects, these are all the different entities in the game. And most of these we'll cover one at a time in lessons because something like logic compare is a logic entity that's required for like programming. So for props, all the stuff in the games, there's three primary types of props. So if we type in prop, you'll see that there's actually a ton of different types of props. But for things in the game like furniture and telephone poles, things like that, there's three. So your most standard prop in the game is a prop static. This is what most of the things in your game are going to be, prop static. These are things that they don't move and they're not intended to move. And sort of a good rule of thumb is a prop static is something that in normal everyday life, if you bump into it, it's not going to move. You can't pick it up, that kind of stuff. So when we put in a prop static, you're going to get this little red box. Okay. Once you do that, you're going to click your selection tool, double click the red box, brings up this menu. Now the first time you click on world model and browse, you're going to get an error that might show a little box right here, but nothing else. It'll be blank. If that happens, you just close this, click off of it, go back to the box, world model, browse, and you should get the model browser. But there is a glitch. The first time you click browse, the browser doesn't come up, it's blank. So you just close everything and then go click off of it and then go back to it, and that fixes it. So world model is how we pick the actual object that goes into the game. Excuse me. So we'll click browse. You always want to make sure that the very top level of this is selected. Otherwise, it only looks for models within this subfolder. So like if I have this human box selected, you'll notice this is completely blank because there's no humans called crates. So you always want to make sure you're at the very top of the MDL file folder hierarchy here. Where it says filter, this is where you type in what you're looking for. So say I'm looking for a toilet. Okay, so I type in toilet. This gets populated with all the different variations of toilets. There's actually quite a few. There's all the pieces of broken toilets and a few different models of the toilets for the game. All right. So let's say I'm going to go with this top one. All right. Now, if we come over here and we look at skins, sometimes there's multiple skins, and those are just, the way the object appears, the texture that goes over the top of it. This one doesn't. It has none. Under info, these checkboxes here tell you what this can be. So this one has static checked, so that means that this is a prop static. Dynamic is checked, so it means this can also be a prop dynamic. We'll cover dynamic here in a second. So static means that this should be good in the game as a prop static. So we'll click OK, click apply. There's the toilet. All right, now I'm going to zoom in. Now sometimes you won't be able to put this exactly where you want it. It'll jump around between these blocks. That probably means that you don't have your grid set low enough. So this little button up here, these two, increase, see how big the blocks are getting, or decrease the block size. Now, I usually go with the smallest block size when I'm placing props because that gives me a box that's about 1 inch, and most of the props are designed to be on grid, which means they're on the lines here. So that'll get them right up against the ground or the walls or whatever you're working with. All right, now let's look at the next type. So entity tool, let's look at prop physics. Okay, so prop physics is probably going to be your second most used prop. And a prop physics is pretty much something that in normal everyday life, if you bumped up against it or you could pick it up or something like that. So I'm going to go world model, browse, and I don't know. Let's do like a chair. So things like chairs, furniture, those are usually physics. If we look under our info tab, you'll see that it says physics. We'll click OK, apply. There's my chair. Okay, and again, I'll make sure it's sitting on the ground. Zoom in here. Okay. Now, I'll double click it. Physics prop. Now, with the physics prop, sometimes you have an object that's a physics prop, but you want it in the game, but you don't want it to move. Like a picture on the wall would be a good example, as something that is a physics prop, but you don't want it to move around. So for that, we have flags, and we have a motion disabled checkbox right here. So what that does is it turns off the physics. The object cannot move. Now the other option is start asleep. And what that does is it temporarily disables the physics until the player touches it. So if you had, say, this chair in the game and you never ever wanted the player to move it, you would say motion disabled. But if you had, say, a picture on the wall that you didn't want to fall on the ground, but you want the player to be able to pick it up, you could stay start asleep. So start asleep would disable the physics until the player touches it, or the player throws something at it and knocks it off the wall. So either of these two options are ways to make a physics prop not move. Motion disabled does it for the entire game. Start asleep will do it for just until the player interacts with it. Now, if you put a prop in the game and it does not appear, like, you know, and I can't think of one off the top of my head that would do this. But, you know, say we put a prop in the game and it does not appear. We have a couple of settings for that. We have a prop physics override, and what that will do is it will force anything in the game to go into the game as a physics prop. So you can use this physics override option to force something in the game. So if you put an object in the game, but then you run the game and the object is missing, switch it to prop physics override, and that will force it into the game. And then remember, we still have the ability to motion disable it. That way the player's not knocking over, you know, light poles and stuff like that. So that is one option for fixing that. The other option is a prop dynamic. Now, prop dynamic is usually something that we're going to move or animate or otherwise interact with, that we're going to add something to it. So we don't use them all that often. You put them in exactly the same way. Prop dynamic, you double click, browse for the world model, and you can kind of just click through here. And, you know, like say we were going to make this chair spin. You know, it's like a dentist chair. What is this? A barber chair or something. It's kind of a scary little chair. You know, say we wanted to make this chair spin in game. That would be a dynamic prop. So we could put that into the game, and then we would have our dynamic prop. And then we could go through and, you know, add rotators to it and stuff like that. Now again, if you put an object in the game as prop dynamic, and then when you run the game the object is missing, we can always use dynamic override. And that will force whatever the object is into the game, and then we'll be able to program it and all that stuff. All right, sorry about that, someone walked through. Anyway, so those are our main three props. Anything else will get covered separately in the lesson that it goes with. But for most objects, just the thing you have to remember, a prop static is anything that normally cannot move in the game. Light poles, toilets, you know, refrigerators, cars, stuff like that. Prop physics is anything that if, you know, a normal human adult bumped into it or they can pick it up, the object would move. So that's most furniture, couches, tables, chairs, things like that. Dynamic props are things that we're going to rotate, spin, move, things like that. So most of your props in the game are going to be prop static. Now remember, if something doesn't show up, you go to run your game and you put all this furniture in the room and some of the furniture is missing. Go back through and switch it to like prop physics override, and then you can check that box on it. Let's see. We can check the motion disable box. So if you have something that you use prop physics override, like this guy right here, we use prop physics override, but I don't want the player to be able to move this around. I go to flags, motion disable, then the game will force the object in, but doesn't allow the player to move it. All right? So those are your basic prop things. You should be able to move forward from there.